evening. Let's call the September 17th meeting of the Harbor Commission open. And Ms. Rodriguez, would you do the roll call, please?
Of course. Commissioner Kramer?
Present.
Commissioner McCray?
Present.
Commissioner Nelson?
Present.
Commissioner Sloan?
Present.
Commissioner Spicer?
Here.
Commissioner Stedman? Commissioner Stedman is absent. And Chair Sly?
Here.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda tonight?
Hello, Harbor Commission. No changes to the agenda tonight, Lang. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is the place on the public, on the agenda where we take public comment. And as a reminder, we have a 2-minute limit on this, and this is for items that are not on the agenda that people wish to address. If you have comments for something that's on the agenda, we prefer that you wait until that agenda item comes up and make the comments, and then they're fresh in everybody's minds. So do we have anyone who's signed up to speak on items that are not on the agenda?
At this moment, there's nobody in the meeting that has raised their hand to indicate that they would like to speak for the general public comment. I think most people who have registered for this webinar are interested in speaking for the last item, which is the waterfront slip assignment policy action.
Okay.
Oh,
we'll
we
move on.
do have one person who's raising their hand.
Okay, good. All right.
Rick Descent, I am going to unmute you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You may begin. Oh, it appears that you're self-muted. Rick Descent, are you available?
Okay, yes. Commissioners, I'm protesting the maximum height restriction of vehicles of 90 inches, and the ban on camper rigs to acquire an annual beach parking permit. Being too wide or too long, I can see is a problem, but being too high, that is not a problem. Most Sprinter vans are 115 inches high. I've been a slip holder for over 25 years, and I want to drive my van down there, and it's 108 inches high, and they sold me a permit, and now I've wasted $125 because they will give me a ticket if I park it down there. And that isn't right. I need my van to haul my 8-foot sailing dinghy down to the harbor, and also to haul my kayaks down to the harbor. So what am I supposed to do? I mean, I need to drive my van down there. Any questions, whatever?
Mike, can you comment on that about the city statute for vehicles?
Yeah, happy to comment. I'm actually going to bring on Brian Bossy. He was kind of instrumental in putting together that ordinance. As far as the inability to refund the ticket, I think that's something that we could probably look into. But the ordinance was kind of a long work in progress, as all of you know. And so there are stipulations and rules within that ordinance that we adhere to.
So if you have a van that's over 90 inches, which is, like I say, a Sprinter van or any other van that has an extended roof on the top, you cannot park, or you cannot buy an annual beach parking permit. They want you to pay every day, which I can't afford to pay every time I go down there.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, this is Brian Bossy speaking. As many of you were involved in this process around this time last year, it actually went through in October. It was a process that included many public meetings, a significant amount of public outreach. There were hearings with the Harbor Commission Parking Subcommittee. There was a hearing with the Harbor Commission. There was a hearing with the Ordinance Committee. There was a hearing with the City Council where all of these issues were hashed out, and a lot of great questions from the public. And part of it was the height limitation that came into effect. We made as much of an outreach as we possibly could. One thing, when you do apply for a permit, there is clear language on there that is very right up front that tells you the dimensions, the maximum dimensions allowed.
I did not see that.
It's on the permit. We made sure that was on there. There was also a flyer attached. And so we wanted to make clear and let everybody continue to know what the ordinance states. You can have a vehicle larger, an oversized vehicle. There are waivers. It's primarily for commercial fishing and other marine related businesses down in the harbor.
But why is 90 inches a restriction? Being too high, that's crazy.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to respond? We usually don't respond to public comment, but I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think it would be, thank you. I think it would be best if you could resolve this and further discuss this outside of the meeting, so we can make sure we get through our agenda. Thank you for your thank you for your comments. We will Mr. Wilshire will get back to you, I'm sure, on that.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
So moving to the consent calendar, we have two items on the consent agenda, and they're both pretty brief. So I'm just going to read the first, which is a recommendation that the Harbor Commission waive further reading and approve the minutes from the special meeting of July 16, 2020.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion or amendments or corrections to suggest? Hearing none. Ms. Rodriguez, would you call for a vote?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Kramer? Commissioner McCray?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Sloan?
Yes.
Oh, fuck
Commissioner
them.
Spicer?
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman?
Yes.
And Chair Sly?
Yes,
Passes unanimously.
thank you. The second item on the consent agenda is an office lease with Brophy and Sons. Mr. Bossi, could you briefly just, it's a pretty straightforward recasting of an existing lease. Could you just give us a quick review of that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Commissioner Sly. This was scheduled to be put on the consent agenda to save time for your meeting. We actually had two proposed leases, but one of them we pushed out to a little later. So this is a standard office lease with Brophy Brothers. They have currently 3 offices located next door where they do their accounting for their businesses and the kind of administrative work. They are scaling down to 2 offices. So the lease reflects just that. Standard term of 5 years, and they're right in line with our other office rents at a little over $2.97 per square foot. Obviously, Brophy Brothers is a tenant in good standing. They've been here for quite some time. And it's again, a pretty simple office lease. I'm happy to entertain any questions if you have them.
Hey, Brian, the only question I have is kind of a procedural one. Why is this on the consent calendar and not on the new business?
Sure, Commissioner Sun, sorry, I mentioned that at the start of this discussion, is based on every now and again when we have a busy agenda and we have some standard leases that are also coming on for that day, we'll put it on a consent agenda item and you can ask questions if you have them. This is a standard lease. And so again, we had originally 2 leases that were going to go on the consent agenda. One of them we pushed out till further in the year, so we kept this on the consent agenda in order to save time.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, I heard you say that. I just misunderstood it. Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
I think the last time we did it was we had 8 leases all coming at once, and so what we did is we put that on a consent agenda, and I can talk about issues if anybody has.
Yeah, no, I like to send calendar items for things like this, so I agree. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Rodriguez, would you take a roll call vote to recommend this, please?
I will, thank you. Commissioner McCray. Commissioner McCray.
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson.
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson.
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan.
Aye.
Sloan.
Approved.
Commissioner Spicer. Commissioner Spicer.
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman. Commissioner Stedman.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Kramer
Yes.
and Chair Sly.
Yes.
Okay, it passes unanimously.
Thank you. Is anyone else getting feedback on this?
I was.
Yeah.
I had a little bit, but I'm not sure why.
A lot of right now.
Still, it's repeating and it's still there. Hopefully it'll clear up. Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda, number 3, the director's report. Mr. Wiltshire?
Yeah, thank you, Harbor Commission. Yeah, I was hearing that feedback too. I don't hear it now, so I'll continue, but if you hear it or can't hear me, be sure to stop me and get me to repeat myself. So yeah, good evening. And firstly, congrats, Lang, on your first meeting in the hot seat as chair. So looking forward to it. Doing good so far. So I'll get on with my director's report. Again, I'm Mike Wiltshire, the Waterfront Director. So yeah, good evening, any of the public watching as well. So next slide, please. I'll do my usual coronavirus update and try and focus on the impacts directly to the waterfront. So as you all know, this thing's still very much with us. One of the big recent changes is the way the state is monitoring and tracking county progress. I've put a graphic up there on the slide. It's probably a little small, but you may have seen it by now. And so this is the state of California's blueprint for a safer economy, which ranks counties based on these 4 tiers. The reason I bring this up is these 4 tiers kind of dictate operational levels for the way business and different entities can operate. And the tiers are based really on 2 things. So the number of new daily cases and then the positivity rate of testing. As of now, unfortunately, Santa Barbara is in the most restrictive tier along with the majority of the counties in California. And so this widespread tier has the most restrictions on business and general operation. So the key impacts of this to the waterfront are really focused on our tenant operations. So this affects indoor dining and boat charters and museums. And although case counts are improving in the county, there's a chance we may move into a slightly less restricted tier. I don't have any timeline on that. It really depends on the data. But if we do move up a tier, this will allow for some easing of restrictions. So although there'd still be restrictions under this tier, this kind of really affects some of our tenants. One of the main impacts of moving up a tier would allow for some level of indoor dining, which would be really beneficial to some of the restaurants that are working hard down here. So yeah, although there's still be restrictions, we kind of seem to be moving in the right direction as a county. So hopefully we can kind of stick with that and continue the behaviors that we've learned. Next slide. More specific to waterfront operations. So Santa Barbara County and the city made a decision to close the beaches and waterfront parking lots over the Labor Day weekend. This was an attempt to really minimize drawing large crowds of out-of-town people and large crowds of beachgoers. So in short, this was not an easy weekend. I think the combo of extreme temperatures and people just kind of really wanting to get to the beach made it made it a tough weekend down here. I know Eric's going to report on this a little bit more, so I'll leave that to his report. But I did also want to mention that unfortunately we had to cancel the Harbor and Seafood Festival this year, which typically takes place in October. Just wanted to take one more chance to kind of message that out publicly. It's been a bummer. It's been tough to cancel these waterfront events, especially my first year here. I was really looking forward to some of these things, and so it's been a tough year. But I've got high hopes of next year being bigger and better than ever. So unfortunately, Harbor Seafood Festival canceled this year, and another note is we're still kind of weighing the options on the Parade of Lights and what's going to happen over the holidays. There's a lot of unknowns between now and then, so we're kind of keep our finger on the pulse and see where we end up with that. And just a quick note on our operations at the Waterfront office. So it is really busy down here. Despite all the COVID closures and changes, things are happening, and it's busy. So, and our methods have certainly changed, but we've been continuing to conduct all of our regular business. So parking operations, marina management, all of our tenant management. Harbor Patrol has certainly been extremely busy. The beaches seem to be a really popular place to go to get outside with everything that's going on. So kudos to Harbor Patrol and all of the staff down here who's kind of found really interesting ways to keep everything working. Next slide. All right, so long awaited. I wanted to give an update on our recruitment for our Harbor Operations Manager position. As we reported on, and as you guys know, this was created by a vacancy when Mick Croman retired last year. So our intent was to recruit and fill the position in the spring around March, but that was right when coronavirus hit. So we, due to budget and just kind of figuring things out, we delayed the recruitment until now, which is now wrapped up. So there were 35 qualified applicants, 9 of which were extremely qualified and recommended to us for formal interviews. We're done the process as of this week, so I'm excited to say we're complete and we've extended an offer. And I want to take this time to formally announce and congratulate Eric Engbretson as our official new Harbor Operations Manager. So yeah, like I said, there were some extremely qualified candidates, but Mr. Engbretson, he really stood out and showed his stuff, and he did a great job in the acting role, but really proved that he was ready to take this on and eager to fill the spot. So congratulate Eric. I'll bring him on. I know he's here, so he might want to say a few words, Eric, if you want to pop your head on the screen.
All right. Well, I think I'm here. It's
Here
good
you.
to see you. You all, yes. Share slide. Commissioners, yeah, thank you. I'm honored, and I really look forward to the continued success of our team. So again, thank you, and look forward to the days ahead.
Thanks, Eric. We appreciate it. Yeah, I can in my time getting to know Eric, he's fantastic for the department, and he's just been a real pleasure to work with. So I'm really glad to kind of fill that spot officially and move forward. It's a good thing for the work group. Next slide. All right, our other big opening. So facilities manager position, Carl Treiberg retired in July. And so we've kind of turned and acted on this one pretty quickly. This is a really critical position. The facilities manager really looks after all of our maintenance and capital improvements of all of the infrastructure here down at the waterfront. So that's everything from our buildings to the marina and Fingers itself, all the docks and Stearns Wharf. So it's a huge amount. And so getting someone back in that role as soon as possible is key. So we're midway through the recruitment process with this one. The online application is closed. We did receive over 30 applicants, and we're hoping to conduct interviews in September, October. And so optimistically, we could make an offer within as soon as sometime in October or November. So again, really looking forward to getting that one filled. Next slide. All right, that's it for me. Just a quick look at our items for next meeting. So Eric will be giving an update on the Clean Harbors effort, and Brian will be bringing back a number of lease renewals for next month. So now I'll turn it over to Mr. Bossy for his business services update.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, Commissioner Nelson.
I noticed on the your recommended items for next month, you've omitted any reference to the fact that we sought guidance from the city council on the issue of gear, boat, and cold storage, which was controversial. We spent a lot of time on it at a couple of commission meetings. And I think that the commission asked for guidance, ought to receive it. So if we could schedule at the next meeting an opportunity for you to provide a presentation on what in fact occurred on August 8th, that would be great.
Commissioner Nelson, thanks for that. Yeah, I was going to speak about it a little bit later, but we do have a commercial fishing subcommittee meeting scheduled for September 23rd at 4 p.m. These suggested tentative agenda items are by no means set in stone. So my hopes were to see what comes of that subcommittee meeting, and maybe we can wrap it into a bigger item if the subcommittee has something to report, or I'm happy to report as well. But I was going to kind of hang back and see what came of that subcommittee meeting.
I understand that, but I guess the issue is, I don't know how often this Harbor Commission seeks guidance and receives it from the city council. And I think at a bare minimum, you should present what in fact occurred in August, that's all. It's just, and if you need it in writing, I'll be happy to put it in writing.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to address those agenda item, and I think it was just, yeah, it was definitely on our mind, and I kind of wanted to see what the commercial fishing subcommittee suggested so we can wrap it all into one item. So it's, yeah, very much on the table.
Okay, thank you.
And I have one comment.
Yes.
Do I speak? Can I speak now?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, I've got a very small correction. The outside aspect of the Museum of Natural History, the Sea Center, is open on weekends from Friday, Saturday to Sunday. It's really a tremendous little tremendous exhibit, and I would encourage people to go there. And it's I know.
Yeah, Commissioner Kramer, thank you for that. Yeah, that completely slipped my mind. Although museums are closed internally, they've worked to kind of create a pretty neat little thing outdoors. So yeah, definitely, please do.
Yeah, it's a great hands-on exhibit. It's just it's a treat, really.
Thanks for the reminder.
I have one question also. As you have done business for quite a few months now remotely, do you sense that in the future, when this is all cleared up about this virus thing, which we're sure it will be someday, in the future, do you think that'll affect substantially the way the harbor staff does business? Will there be a lot more stuff done where people are not walking in the front door and finding the right person?
Yeah, that's also a great question. My gut tells me yes. I mean, it's if at a minimum we found a way to do a lot more things online and streamline some things, and so internally we're looking at ways to get a lot more available online for annual parking permits, for slip work and marina management functions. So yeah, it's kind of to be seen where we end up with it, but it has forced our hand in a lot of efficiencies. So I think that's really a great opportunity.
Okay, interesting. Any other questions relating to the director's report? If not, we can move to the business services report. Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I just have a brief update, kind of in line with what Mr. Wiltshire was just talking about regarding COVID issues down here at the waterfront. Next slide. Some of this you might remember from back in June, but there are some updates. So I wanted to let the Commission as well as the public know about the city's rent deferral program. So soon after the COVID pandemic really took hold in the United States, the City Council adopted ordinance number 5941, which is a temporary eviction moratorium ordinance, otherwise called TEMO, if you will. And the reason for that was to prevent mass evictions on both a residential scale, so apartments, homes, things like that, as well as commercial tenancies. The original moratorium, or TIMO, if you will, allowed for tenants to defer their rent for the months of April and May, obviously not knowing how long this pandemic would last. About 2 months later, on the 19th of May, the City Council adopted another ordinance, number 5943, which was in line with the first ordinance, but it expanded the rent deferral program to include not only April and May, but also added June, July, August, and September. Next slide. So the rent deferral program is set up, or I should say the ordinance is set up to be coterminous with the state. So we were kind of following the state's guidance, as have, I believe, over 150 cities and counties within the state. One of the things that it includes is it doesn't forgive you rent, but it does allow you to defer that rent to be payable at a later time. Currently, that time frame is it's to be paid back within 12 months of that final month. So for our tenants, that would be their, for whatever rent they deferred would be due in September of 2021. Now we have, as you might know, 61 different leases and license agreements. So essentially 61 tenants, if you will. And at the start, we had about 24 enroll, but since that time, it's been whittled down. A number of businesses have actually had good months here and there, and they were able to, in fact, pay their rent, and so they opted out. So now I believe we're down to about 12 tenants who are currently participating in the rent deferral program. So that slide even that you see up on the screen of 14, which was put together the other day, has been whittled down by 2, where tenants came in and paid their full amount of rent for whatever months they had deferred. So just wanted to let you know about that. We'll continue to monitor that situation. Next slide, please. And this, again, is more of a refresher back to our June meeting, talking about outdoor dining and the flexible business operations that I'm sure you've seen all over the city. The City Council, if you remember, allowed restaurants to create temporary outdoor dining areas through early December. I believe it's December 8th of 2020. A number of our tenants who have the ability to do that have done that. We've even seen, as Commissioner Kramer mentioned, the Sea Center on the weekends, and a number of other tenants out on the wharf have done that. Brophy Brothers is doing that. The opening of Chomp and Salty at the beach, they will be participating in an outdoor program as well. And so we're working with our tenants to make sure they follow the city guidelines and doing whatever we can to help and support them through this trying time. So again, businesses are open, so we encourage the public to come on down to the waterfront. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Do the tenants who've enrolled in this program tend to be in a group, services or restaurants, or is it just a mix of a little bit of everybody?
That's a great question, Commissioner Slide. It's a little bit of everybody. We have some of our larger restaurants. We have some of our smaller commercial enterprises as well. So it's quite a mixed bag.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question, more clarification than anything else. When you gave a number of affected parties, you mentioned both leases and licenses. And how would you characterize slips? Are they licenses?
The slip program is not part of the rent deferral process.
But is it a license? What would be the technical term for the authority or permission that a slip holder has? Is because I know it's an interest in property that's taxed. I'm just kind of curious, is it a license or a lease?
I would consider it a month-to-month agreement.
Okay.
So that's our slip permits are month by month. There's no long-term included in that. It's month to month.
Okay.
Other questions about the business services report? If not, let's move to the facilities management report. Mr. Wilshire, is that you tonight?
Yeah, you're stuck with me again with our facilities manager position vacant. So I'll get into the facilities manager report. I just want to take some time to update you on a couple projects that are still going on. So next slide, please. Firstly, a quick update on the underground storage tank replacement project, as there's been a little bit of movement here. So as previously presented, this project is to replace the existing fuel tanks that serve the fuel dock at the end of the city pier. And the tanks themselves are located under a concrete pad kind of in Harbor Way, right up near the fish market. And the project is actually the responsibility of our tenant, fuel dock tenant, but Waterfront is supporting with logistics and kind of making sure that the project stays underway. So this project originally started back in February, but had to be halted because during excavation, an unknown Edison transmission line was located right above one of the existing tanks. So we put the project on hold at that point, and after some discussion, kind of strategized and determined that it was the best path forward to relocate that Edison transmission line so that it wasn't in the way of the new tanks. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, thanks. And so here's a rough timeline. So as mentioned, the relocation of this Edison line delayed the project, but that relocation is currently underway right now. So the Waterfront staff took on the management and funding of the transmission line relocation, put together design drawings and bid that project out. It was recently awarded to Lash Construction, who's been on site this week completing that trenching work and laying new conduit for the transmission line. So that's kind of phase one of allowing us to get back to where we were. So once this line is relocated and tied in, that tank replacement project can resume and pick up where it left off. So we're really hopeful that sometime this fall or winter, the contractor will be cleared and ready and just kind of resume that project where they took off. And I'll pause now if anyone has any questions on this tank replacement project.
When you do restart this, what do you think the duration of the work is, start to finish, when you get back?
Yeah, that's a great question. They've already completed a lot of the difficult work. So they saw cut all that concrete and kind of gotten into a lot of it. So I'm anticipating in the range of no longer than 4 to 6 weeks, and that's probably on the high end. And so it'll be an impact to the tenants down here and the traffic flow. But we've kind of already figured that out because we went through it once. And so we've got all the signage and figured out how to reroute the traffic. And so my hope is it won't be as impactful as if we were actually starting from beginning. All right, hearing no more questions, I'll move on to the next slide. So I wanted to give a quick update on the ice house project. So as previously presented, the existing equipment in the ice house, it's really reaching its useful life. So the Waterfront department spends a significant amount of money on maintenance and it's regularly out there, just keeping it going. So the plan with this is to maintain the existing structure, the building itself, but replace the equipment inside with kind of a modular skid mounted system fabricated by North Star. Next slide. So a little timeline on this project. Preliminary design has been completed, and so that was completed in the summer. And we're currently entering into a contract for final design, which will hopefully move forward by the end of September. And this will allow us to begin the process of completing final construction documents and the permit process. So ideally, construction documents and permit will be completed by spring of 2021. And this would allow us to bid the project for construction in spring, kind of spring, summer, and allow construction in summer, fall of next year. And as far as funding goes, the Waterfront department set aside $600,000 in our capital program for this project. As of now, the estimate is that about 100,000 of that will go into the design and the permitting process, and it'll leave us about 500,000 for the construction. And again, we're optimistically looking at that kind of summer, fall of next year for construction of this project. Any questions on that one?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
I suppose that it potentially could necessitate some structural piling work underneath it, which kind of indicates perhaps the North Star system is more weighty. Does that mean potentially that it would have more capacity to generate ice than our existing system?
Great question. There were some studies done by Carl, a previous facilities manager, on the usage and the requirements for ice. I believe it makes roughly 10 tons of ice and has the ability to store 12 tons. It was kind of determined that that was sufficient. And so instead of spending more dollars to upsize equipment unnecessarily, I think we targeted that size. But you're right, there will be a structural analysis of the pier piles beneath it, and there'll likely be some repair and fortification of that, mainly because they've been there for so long, and it's just time. It'd be a perfect time to do that. So in short, it's not a plan to upsize the capacity, but there will be some structural improvements underneath the pier.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw a question to you that you're not prepared to answer probably, but I'm going back to Merritt's question about capacity. I think we have 35 slips dedicated to the fishing fleet, if I remember. Is the fishing fleet kind of holding steady as to number of participants and their use of this facility, or is it shrinking a little bit? What's your sense of that?
Thanks for the question. You're right. I wasn't prepared for that one. In general, I think it has been fairly status quo. I am aware of some requests for additional commercial fishing slips. Commissioner Nelson can certainly speak to the fact that the commercial fishing industry relies heavily on the ice house, and it's a huge part of the business in a number of chains, from storing fresh catch to packing and shipping. And so if you're getting at, is there a need for it? I think there really still is. There's still a significant amount of demand for this kind of high quality flake ice that's produced at the ice house.
Yeah, and I was not getting at that. I think it's absolutely essential, and I understand how critical it is and how critical it is for it to always work. I just wondered if the demand was kind of stand flat for the production of ice. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And if you need any further answer on that, I'm happy to ask you.
No, I think that's adequate for me. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, next slide. Boat launch mini mart fire. So as we previously reported on April 21st, there was a pretty unfortunate fire at the boat launch mini mart, which, as you can see by that photo, completely destroyed the majority of the building's interior and the roof, and really the majority of the building. So Waterfront staff has been working pretty tirelessly with insurance adjusters and fire inspectors and contractors to kind of move this one through the process to get this building back and operable and ready for tenant use. Next slide. So as you can see by these photos, there's been some progress. So a contract was awarded and the building's been cleaned up and has a new roof on it and new framing installed. And it's anticipated that the contractor will need kind of 2 or 3 more weeks to complete the building exterior repairs before we hand it back over to the tenant for their interior improvements. And we're in discussion with the tenant, and they're excited and eager to get back in there and get back to business. So it's good to see this one turning, and we're hopeful that it happens quickly and gets them back in there. Any questions on the mini mart rebuild? All right, well, seeing no questions, I'll hand it over to our,
I don't have it's not really a question, just a comment. Dick and Dolly have been very much missed, and it'll be great to have them back there. So thanks for moving ahead so quickly on this.
I cut out a little bit. I missed you at the tail end there, but thank you.
I just said thank you for moving ahead so quickly with this.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, it was kind of a tragic one, but getting it back and built will be a good thing. All All right, I'm going to hand it over to our brand new harbor ops manager, Eric, for his harbor operations update.
Good evening, Chair Sly and commissioners. Well, I'm glad to be here on a more permanent basis. And again, very appreciative to Mike and the hiring crew and all the work that they put in on the recruitment. A quick report here. We have our 2020 air grants, Marine Diesel Engine Repower Program. These funds come from the Santa Barbara County Air Pollution Control District, and it's a great way for folks with older polluting diesel motors to get funds and either replace or repower those vessels. It's sponsored by the Community Air Protection Program and California Department of Motor Vehicles surcharge revenue. Eligible vessels are non-regulated commercial marine vessels such as charter fishing and commercial fishing, commercial work, and research vessels. Regulated commercial fishing vessels as well, barges, cruise supply boats, what have you there. Unfortunately, recreational vessels don't qualify, and nor do gas motors. If you have a gas engine, you might not be able to qualify for this particular grant. Applications will be accepted a 45-day window. Next slide, please. And that runs from September 8th through October 30th, 23rd. And for more information, you can apply online with the www.ourair.org/funding. Any questions on the Clean Air Grants Program? Okay, the next slide, please. We had a vessel go aground on August 8th at approximately 5 p.m. and the sailing vessel Norma Zane. It's a 1977-foot or 38-foot dreadnought boat went aground between East Beach and Butterfly Beach. Harbor Patrol Boat 3 responded, found one person safely on the beach. Additional fire units were called in, Montecito and Santa Barbara City Fire. They deployed rescue divers. They ascertained no one else was in the water. Reported that there was a small amount of water intrusion on the vessel but could not locate the source. The following day, the vessel was towed off the beach by a Good Samaritan. The owner, Jeff Lupke, he's a well-known mariner who resides and has for quite a number of years out in Anchorage, took responsibility of his vessel. And unfortunately, it was later learned that Mr. Lupke had collapsed on the beach in the early morning hours of the day and passed away from an apparent heart condition. We want to extend our condolences to his wife, Linda, family and friends, as they mourn their loss of a really good mariner. He'll be missed. Next slide. Labor Day weekend, I believe Mike had touched on it a little bit, was a little tricky for Harbor Patrol. Although the county had ordered beaches to remain closed, we had quite a few people descend on our city beaches. In an effort to deter that, we did close some of the parking lots. The Harbor Main lot and Stearns Wharf remained open, but all the other waterfront lots were closed. Harbor Patrol, Santa Barbara Police Department, county sheriffs, we took more of a educational enforcement stance with the public, especially considering the triple-digit numbers that we had. Next slide. And then the dive boat conception memorial. If you didn't get a chance to see it, It's still available online, and I'll get to that in just a bit. But unlike, let's see, in honor of those who lost their lives on September 2nd, 2019, on board the Diet Boat Conception, the City of Santa Barbara Waterfront Department held a virtual commemoration plaque dedication on the 1-year anniversary of the tragedy. The video was webcast on GoToWebinar and on City TV Channel 18, as well as other media outlets. The video included an introduction from Harbor Patrol Officer Ryan Kelly, along with Officer Carl Palmachek, who were the two the first responders from our agency to the fire. Commemoration was addressed by Susan Grimacy, Public Information Officer with County Department of Behavior Wellness, Mayor Kathy Murillo, and Santa Barbara Sheriff Bill Brown. Producing the memorial was a team effort, and special thanks go out to Carl Treiberg, who worked with the families of the victims to design and produce a plaque, and also Suzanne Grimacy. Also, special thanks go to Tom Dietz, Waterfront Facility Superintendent, Terry Franson, and Bill Moreno, Waterfront Facility staff, Angela Rodriguez, Waterfront Administrative Assistant, Steve Barros, Waterfront Parking Supervisor, and finally, yet importantly, Chris Bell, our Public Information Officer for the Waterfront, who did a great job just putting the whole thing together. And the video is still available on City's TV and YouTube channel. And if you haven't seen it, it was well done and a really nice tribute to those lost. And that concludes my report. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Engelbretson, and congratulations again. I think everybody's pleased to see you continue in that role. And I noticed that it still says interim Harbor Operations Manager on your screen there. We're going to have to fix that.
Yeah, exactly. I was getting the whiteout and putting it on there.
It doesn't work on GoToMeeting, I guess. Okay. Under new business, item number 7 is the draft sea level rise adaptation plan.
Chair Slide, excuse me, before we move on, we do have one public comment that someone would like to speak on this past item.
Oh, okay.
Jamie Diamond. I'm going to unmute you, Jamie, and then you will have 2 minutes to speak. You may begin.
Good evening, commissioners and everyone at home. While grateful for the Carl Moyer program and the funding it provides small businesses like mine at Stardust Sport Fishing, for years I have felt the local APCD has created far stricter rules for applicants than other counties. For example, it's wholly unreasonable to force applicants to pay upfront and provide proof of payment before being reimbursed. The program should be paying directly to the vendor or to the applicant so they can pay the vendor. Most applicants are not able to finance a large project and should not be forced to take out a loan and go into debt if they're already approved for and receiving a grant. Furthermore, Santa Barbara is by far the most restrictive in terms of use of equipment and funding available, with a maximum of $150,000 in Southern California. It only takes a moment to look at last year's funded projects in Ventura County and others to see they were funded well over that. SLO County funds up to $500,000, for example. I'm here to ask the commission to consider making a request to the Santa Barbara County APCD hearing board for this in the next few cycles to remove the prepayment restriction on businesses. COVID has already placed a huge burden on us all. It was hard enough to get a loan pre-COVID. I cannot imagine how hard it will be now for some, especially if you've already received an EIDL loan. I'd ask that you please advocate for the waterfront businesses you represent and ask the Santa Barbara County APCD to remove the prepayment terms and conditions. Thank you.
Okay, I have to apologize. I don't know what APCD is. I don't know that program. Could Mr. Wilshire, could you comment?
That's the Carl Moyer program that Mr. Engelbretson was just talking about, the engine repower program through the Air Pollution Control District.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, the small businesses like mine and Mr. Nelson knows so well, these engines can cost upwards of $800,000, depending on how many engines you need. There's a craft in the harbor that's going to have to get a loan for $1 million to put in new engines that are perfectly fine, or to replace engines that are perfectly fine. And so, especially now with it being so difficult to get funding for anything, I'd really appreciate it if you would be willing to put at the hearing of the APCD next month, at their hearing board, to advocate for the businesses you represent and see if there's a way to get them to waive that term and condition that they have right now.
Okay, I don't know whether we have the ability to do that as a commission, but or a staff. But Mr. Wilshire, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, happy to comment. Yeah, I mean that program is run and governed by the county, so the APCD is overseen by the county. It is, I think, well within the commission's power to write a letter in support or in opposition, or if you did particularly take a stance, but it is kind of outside of the purview of city business, which you are typically tasked with. But it does directly affect kind of constituents within the waterfront, within the harbor. So that would be something that you could discuss and possibly take a stance on.
Betsy?
Yeah, I think because of the Brown Act, I think it would have to be on this is a new item and it should be on agendized. But could we discuss it? Could this be discussed and have it on the agenda for next meeting, next month?
We certainly could, and in hearing the public comment, you're also more than welcome to respond individually. So if you wanted to reach out or provide public comment individually to the APCD, you could do that as well. And so for those commissioners who wanted to act sooner than later, they could. For those that aren't interested or who are in opposition, could simply not. So that might be a way to approach it as well.
Well, she's asking specifically that the Harbor Commission write a letter, and I don't think that's an action we can take tonight.
Yeah, you're correct. You would need to be an opportunity for the public to weigh in on that. You'd have a kind of a formal discussion if you guys were going to take an action to write a letter to the county.
I would be in favor of putting it on the agenda next month if that's it's still timely.
And so would I, because we met with the commercial fishermen met with APCD probably a year or so ago, and as I recall the conversation, state law requires that the funding occur up front and not be a reimbursement. And so that would be the challenge that we would face. Would be we may have to get legislation to in fact allow for reimbursement as opposed to to allow for a payment up front as opposed to reimbursement. But I would certainly support Commissioner Kramer's encouragement that we put it on the next agenda.
Well, there's a note in the report that applications are accepted through October 23rd of this year. So do we really have a hope of having some influence on this within the required timeline?
Obviously not within this current grant cycle, but this will be a problem. This is an annual program. This is the 2020 grants program. So in 2021, it's likely that you'll hear about this issue again.
Okay, well, thank you. We have two commissioners who would like to put it on the agenda next month. So unless there are thoughts otherwise, let's try to do that.
Happy to do it.
Okay.
I would agree. I have a question for Ms. Diamond. A comment and question. I actually participated in a repower program similar to this many years ago, and I recall that what happened is that there was an escrow account established. The grant application was filed. The escrow account was funded. the engine provider did their work and then was paid out of the escrow account. So at that time, it was legal for that to happen. The question, as I recall, one of the drivers of these repowers is that the regulations on diesel engines are ever ramping up to diesel engines which are almost unaffordable any other way. And so it's not like it's one of those things where you apply for a grant and whoopee, you get the grant and you get to do your project. It's like you apply for the grant because you know that ultimately you're going to be required to install an engine which you can't afford any other way. And I would like to ask Ms. Diamond if that's still the case.
Yes, Vice Commissioner McCray, that is still the case. So the CARB, California Air Resource Board, is constantly ramping up regulation on engines. They started this years ago, and it's ongoing. There's actually current talks right now to try and get vessels to put in a Tier 4 engine, which is essentially a giant lithium ion battery in wood boats, which is a really bad idea. And we've spoken with engine manufacturers who say they refuse to build one for our vessels because it's so unsafe. But there's an agenda that to push for a zero emissions, which is not possible for a lot of vessels. So right now we're trying to stay ahead of the game, and instead of getting to a point where for us personally, we're up against the ropes with an engine that they no longer accept. We're trying to be ahead of it and be proactive. There are other vessels in the same boat, I guess. But like I said, there's a vessel in our harbor that is going to have to get $1 million loan in order to do this because they have to, even though their engines are perfectly fine and meet all emission standards. But if you went to SLO or Ventura, they could get a grant for up to $500,000. So each district is allowed to make stricter regulations. They just can't than what the basic Carl Moyer program has, their outline. They can't be looser than the Carl Moyer outline, but Santa Barbara has definitely taken us to task on being one of the strictest.
And do you suppose that if we were to write a letter at the same time that you were applying for this and were to be accepted and be approved for the grant, that our letter might have some effect in that interim between the time that you were approved and the time that funding would actually come to town potentially, and that you would be actually doing the work of replacing the engine?
No, I do not see myself benefiting from this. I know the pace that county and state moves at, and we have already signed our application and submitted it and agreed to those terms. But I am doing this on behalf of many other vessels like mine, commercial vessels that are not in that are not able to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your input, and we will take that up at the next meeting.
At the next meeting, you might want to consider having a representative from APCD be there to answer questions about this program, as opposed to simply relying on staff research.
I think that's a really good idea, good suggestion.
They've shown a willingness to meet with anyone in the commercial. We sent out the same notice that Eric provided you and every year, and they promised to follow up in person. So I think if the commission were to make the request, they would certainly have a representative at our next meeting.
Mm-hmm. Very good idea. Thanks.
Chair Sly, we have one more person who would like to speak on this item, Christopher Voss. Christopher Voss, I'm going to unmute you. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. You may begin. It appears you're self-muted at the moment. Christopher Voss, you may begin.
Yeah, and there's a delay here, but don't have a comment on this. Actually, I don't know why this shows my hand up, but I apologize. I don't have a comment.
Okay, well, it's nice to hear your voice, Mr. Voss, anyway.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's move to new business item 7 on the agenda, the draft sea level rise adaptation plan. And Ms. Rodriguez, would you read that for us, please? And then I think Mr. Wilshire will introduce our presenter tonight.
Yes, so item number 7 is draft sea level rise adaptation plan. Recommendation is that Harbor Commission receive a presentation and provide comments on the draft sea level rise adaptation plan. And given the size of the plan, staff recommends that comments focus on the recommended near-term actions outlined on pages ES 23 through ES 26 of the executive summary.
All right, yeah, I'm happy and pleased to introduce Melissa Hetrick. She's a project planner within the Community Development Department and kind of our city sea level rise guru. So she's been hugely helpful to me since I've been in my role, and we've been working a bit together on it. But and I want to ask you to maybe cut her a little break tonight. She's on a bit of a sea level rise roadshow. I think she's presenting to six boards and commissions this week, so it's a long haul. But I'll turn it over to Melissa and look forward to a pretty interesting presentation.
Thank you, Michael Chair. Good evening, Chair Sly and Commissioners. I'm Melissa Hetrick with the city's planning division, and I'm the project manager on the city's sea level rise adaptation plan. And tonight, the purpose of my presentation is to tell you about the draft sea level rise plan that is out for public review right now. Next slide. So even though I'm the project manager, there's actually an entire staff interdepartmental team working on this project that's composed of members from all the major city departments. There's a team of consultants led by environmental science associates. There's a sea level rise adaptation plan subcommittee that consists of members of council, planning commission, parks and rec commission, harbor commission, and water commission. And Commissioner Sloan and Commissioner Kramer have been participating in that subcommittee. And then we're working closely with Coastal Commission, the county, Beacon, and other state and federal agencies on the plan. Next slide. So just a little background, next slide. So to date, sea levels offshore Santa Barbara have not risen significantly. However, in upcoming years, it's expected that sea level rise will accelerate significantly. And as you know, the waterfront has always experienced risk during storm events. The pictures on the right-hand side of this slide are from the El Nino storm event in March 1983, which caused damage and flooding to the harbor commercial area. You'll see the picture of the Harbor Yacht Club there. It buckled the end of Stearns Wharf, the picture on the lower right. And then the picture on the lower left is actually just shows flooding and debris across Cabrillo Boulevard. So as sea levels rise, it's expected that these type of events and flooding and erosion events will increase in frequency and extent. And so for that reason, our general plan, our climate action plan, and our coastal plan direct the preparation of a comprehensive sea level rise plan for the city. In addition, sea level rise analysis is now required for all coastal development permitting and really any permitting or grant funds at the state level. In addition, in 2018, Assembly Bill 691 was passed, which required the city as a trustee of state tidelands to plan for sea level rise at the harbor and Stearns Wharf. So in 2019, we certified an updated coastal land use plan for the city that includes interim development review policies that factor sea level rise into coastal development permitting while a more longer term sea level rise adaptation plan is prepared. Next slide. So we began the more comprehensive plan in 2018, and the plan that we just released covers all areas of the city except for the airport. And the reason for that is the airport was actually studied as part of a 2015 multi-jurisdiction assessment of the entire Goleta Slough area. So at the end of 2018, we released what's called a vulnerability assessment. This essentially showed what would happen if no action is taken, how sea level rise would affect flooding and erosion through the year 2100 in Santa Barbara. We just released on August 11th a draft adaptation plan, and this provides options for the city to mitigate risks over time. So the adaptation plan provides a framework for future planning for sea level rise in phases. It analyzes a number of different types of adaptation options. They generally fall into three major categories, those adaptation options. Protection, options that protect development in place through measures such as seawalls and revetments or dunes, measures that accommodate development in place through measures such as raising buildings or floodproofing facilities, and then measures that retreat. So that's either removal or relocation of facilities, or regulations that disallow new development in certain areas, hazard buffers. In addition, the adaptation plan considers economic and fiscal impacts. So I'd like to emphasize here that the adaptation plan was a citywide plan. It really is a first order plan. So we were not able to look at every pipe the city owns, every pier the city owns. We weren't able to answer every question out to 2100. In addition, the sea level rise adaptation plan does not commit the city at this point to any given adaptation action. So the way you can think about the adaptation plan is it's really a to-do list. So it lists out, recommends studies that the city could do and actions the city could take to mitigate the impacts of sea level rise, and then lets us know when decisions on those actions need to be made. So after council considers the adaptation plan for adoption, it's at that point that any given recommendation within the plan, any recommended action, would then be further developed and then go through its normal city process for approval. Next slide. So this is our schedule. We're nearing the end of a 2-month public outreach period. I've been making a number of presentations, as Mr. Wiltshire mentioned, to the city's commissions. In addition, we have a public webinar on September 24th, which is a good opportunity for any members of the public to ask questions. We'll then be reconvening our subcommittee, who will be delivering comments on the draft plan. We'll make revisions to the draft plan. The subcommittee will then reconvene and consider making a recommendation to council. And then we anticipate that by the end of the year, council will consider adoption of the plan. Next slide. So how is the city vulnerable to sea level rise? So there are a number of factors that affect the rate of sea level rise offshore of Santa Barbara. And these include things like how the Antarctic ice sheet is melting, vertical land motion, how our ocean, the Pacific Ocean, is expanding due to global warming, and ocean circulation patterns. So because there's so many different factors, this means that sea levels are rising in different amounts throughout the world. So for instance, the East Coast of the US has experienced a lot more sea level rise than the West Coast. In addition, as new studies come out about each one of these factors and new information is gained, we get new projections for how fast sea level could rise. So next slide. So with all this new information coming in all the time, there's a number of different models and projections for sea level rise. So what the state is doing is they basically are convening a technical working group every 5 years, that wades through all these projections, and then basically tells each city and county what amount of sea level rise we should be planning for. So these projections are from their 2018 State of California sea level rise guidance. And the blue line is the one that they want us to plan for. So that is 0.8 feet of sea level rise by 2030, 2.5 feet of sea level rise by 2060, and then 6.6 feet by 2100. So this projection is a very conservative projection. It has something like a 1 in 200 chance of being met or exceeded. The guidance also contains much more likely scenarios. So one of those more likely scenarios is shown as the orange line in this graph, and that has something like a 17% chance of being met or exceeded. And then there are much more extreme scenarios. So that's shown by the red line on this graph, and that represents a situation where the Antarctic ice sheet has a catastrophic failure. So just a couple notes on these projections. You'll notice that in the next 10 years or 20 years, the projections are much closer together. There's much less uncertainty, but as we move out in time, the uncertainty becomes much bigger. In addition, if you look at, these are all high emission projections, but if you look at the projections if we decrease greenhouse gases, the projections show a much slower rise in sea levels and then a leveling out. But if you look at all the projections out to like the year 2200, you'll see that all of the projections eventually reach 6.6 feet of sea level rise. It's just that depending on the assumptions of the model, it's either sooner or later. So knowing that these projections are changing all the time and will continue to change, the city's approach in the adaptation plan is to closely monitor sea level rise and shoreline conditions as they change, and then to take action when certain amounts of sea level rise are reached, and to plan around certain amounts of sea level rise as opposed to the exact year in which it might occur, if that makes sense. Next slide. So you'll see these terms in the sea level rise plan, and they are based on amounts of sea level rise. So near term is between 0 and 0.8 feet of sea level rise, and then from there we move into midterm and long term, spanning all the way from 0.8 feet of sea level rise to 6.6 feet of sea level rise. Next slide. So these are the type of hazards that the vulnerability assessment looked at. Tidal inundation is flooding from regular high tides, so not a storm condition, that's just your normal high tide condition. The study looked at bluff erosion, year-to-year shoreline erosion. It also looked at wave activity and flooding during a 100-year coastal storm event. And then it also looked at areas of the city that are low-lying and which are not directly connected to the ocean, but which could flood more frequently in the future due to rising groundwater levels from sea level rise. Next slide. So these are the hazard maps that are in the vulnerability assessment. 2 notes on these maps. These maps show what would happen if no action is taken. In addition, these maps do not show all the hazards in the city. They don't show all the landslides in the city or all the flooding that could occur in the city. These maps only show flooding and erosion hazards that could be exacerbated by sea level rise. So this is the west side of the city, which is predominantly coastal bluffs. This is 0.8 feet of sea level rise. And the areas shown in orange and yellow are a risk of bluff erosion. And this is very similar, if not almost looking the same as an existing condition map. We have a threat of bluff erosion now along our bluffs. Next slide. So by 2.5 feet of sea level rise, back one slide, we see bluff erosion rates increasing by approximately 40% over historic rates. We see bluff erosion affecting shoreline drive by Ledbetter Beach. In addition, by 2.5 feet of sea level rise, it's anticipated that 80% of the beaches that are backed by bluffs in the city will be lost. And the reason for that is that bluff erosion will happen slower than sea level rise. So essentially, the ocean will begin to drown out the beaches. Next slide. So this is 6.6 feet of sea level rise. Here we see erosion reaching multiple points along Shoreline Drive. We see bluff erosion rates 140% higher than historic rates, and all beach access lost along the bluffs. Next slide. So this is the east side of the city, the low-lying waterfront area. And you'll see that the maps for this area are a lot different, and the beach loss is a lot different. And there's several main reasons for that. One is the orientation of the coast in this area and the low-lying topography behind the beaches. But in addition, a huge factor in this area, as you may well know, is the presence of the harbor breakwater. The harbor breakwater essentially acts as a groin, and sand backs up behind it to fill up Ledbetter Beach. In addition, as you know, the harbor and West Beach fill up with sand, and we, an Army Corps, dredge that sand and then place it on East Beach. And without placement of that sand that we do now, East Beach would erode much closer to Cabrillo Boulevard than it does now. So moving forward, the presence of the harbor breakwater is a huge factor in keeping our beach areas on the waterfront and also for protecting the west side and lower downtown neighborhoods. So on this map, the aqua color is tidal inundation, and the two darker blues are impacts during storms. And then the pink color is shoreline erosion. So next slide. Oh, actually, let's stay at 0.8. So something to note at 0.8 feet of sea level rise, the city now, the harbor and Stearns Wharf is at risk from damage during high wave events during extreme coastal storms. That's true now. And so moving into 0.8 feet of sea level rise, it just becomes more likely that a less extreme storm event or more moderate event overtops the breakwater and causes damage at Stearns Wharf. In addition, by 0.8 feet of sea level rise, many of our piers on our marinas and the city dock will not be tall enough to accommodate high tide conditions. So next slide. So by 2.5 feet of sea level rise, you'll still see that most of the impacts of sea level rise are south of Cabrillo Boulevard. But for the waterfront and the harbor, the impacts will still be felt. So at the harbor, you'll see that the tidal inundation, that's the aqua color, is starting to move into the harbor main parking lots. In addition, we see erosion affecting the south part of the harbor commercial area by the yacht club. We also see storm waves reaching up to Cabrillo in some locations. Next slide. So at 6.6 feet of sea level rise, the map changes a lot. And this blue color on the map, some might recognize as being the shape of the historic El Estero, which is a historic wetland that occurred in Santa Barbara prior to 1920s. It was a low-lying wetland that was filled after the 1929 earthquake. From that filling, we created the lower downtown area. So it still remains an area that is very low in the city. If you look at our FEMA flood hazard maps now, this area is in the FEMA flood hazard area maps now. It floods during high rainfall events. So the difference is that with 6.6 feet of sea level rise north of Highway 101, it's anticipated that the flood levels would be about the same depths as we're experiencing now, but the flood frequency would be much higher. And the reason for that is that it would be flooding not just during high rainfall events, but also during high wave or coastal storm events. Yeah. And then south of Highway 101, you'll see that tidal inundation or regular high tides without us doing anything will reach all the way up to Highway 101 and affect the railroad. In addition, storm flooding will be much more extensive, much more deep, and could impact Highway 101 at the bird refuge. At this point, we see tidal inundation affecting the entire harbor area and the harbor commercial area, and erosion reaching Cabrillo Boulevard in multiple locations. Next slide. So moving on to how we adapt to mitigate these risks. Next slide. So the approach in the sea level rise plan is really a phased approach. It's based on, as I mentioned before, monitoring of shoreline conditions and sea levels and taking actions when certain triggers or thresholds are reached. And those triggers or thresholds are backed up to give us time to prepare and plan and permit projects. So we're not going to wait until the high tides are on us. We're going to back it up and make the decisions many years in advance. The plan recommends very specific near-term actions that the city could take in the next 10 years to prepare for sea level rise. And then it proposes a structure for decision-making in the mid and long term. Once the adaptation plan is approved, it's recommended that the city create a 5-year implementation plan where we would basically take the list of near-term actions and identify specific costs, potential funding, timelines, required resources, and then further prioritize the near-term action list. So essentially get all the actions ready to be put into our capital improvement program, ready to be applying for funding, and ready to be implemented. One of the first actions that's proposed out of this implementation plan is the creation of a shoreline monitoring program in conjunction with our regional and state partners. And we are actually in the process now of applying for grant money to start that shoreline monitoring program in collaboration with Beacon. And then so basically the results of the shoreline monitoring program would inform the regular update of the 5-year implementation plan. And then it's recommended that the overall long-term adaptation plan be reevaluated every 10 years. Next slide. So if you look at the cost benefit analysis in the adaptation plan, you'll see that the cost of doing nothing out to 6.6 feet of sea level rise is very high. It's something like $4 billion. But the cost of protecting everything in place is also very high. It's almost the same amount of money. And so moving forward, it's going to be very important for the city to prioritize its actions and really be selective about the projects it undertakes. And so in order to guide that prioritization and planning, the Sea Level Rise Subcommittee created what's called guiding principles for adaptation. And they're included in the executive summary that was part of your agenda packet. And the highest priorities in these guiding principles are protection of human life, health, and safety, and then protection of critical facilities, public transportation systems, and public services for basic city functions. But the principles go beyond that. They encourage actions that minimize impacts to the economy, existing development, public access, and coastal resources. It encourages actions that broadly benefit the community and which provide equitable sharing of costs and benefits, and actions that have co-benefits. Next slide. So I do just want to, you all might be a little bit more familiar with these concepts, but a lot of the commissions don't actually know what some of these terms mean. And so I just always like to have this slide in here. Because they're talked about a lot. So revetments and seawalls. The top is a rock revetment, and then the bottom is a seawall. And both structures are used for preventing erosion, and seawalls are also used for preventing flooding. So these structures can be very effective at protecting whatever is in back of them. They do come at a high cost, though. They cost a lot to maintain, especially with the changing conditions anticipated with sea level rise. They would have to be replaced frequently. In addition, they come at a cost to the beach, and basically where they are placed, they can cause increased beach erosion in front of where they are placed and to the sides. So inevitably, you won't see these alone. They usually are an entire stretch of beach, because inevitably, if once one is placed, then the neighboring properties need to place them. And so you can pretty quickly see, depending on where they're placed and how close to wave action they're placed, that once they're placed, you'll often see sometimes an even very fast erosion of the beach in front of where they are. And so it's for this reason that the city has in particular had a very strong policy against use of revetments and seawalls, except for things like the harbor, protection of major public roads, and other coastal dependent facilities. But moving forward, there's going to be a lot more pressure to use revetments and seawalls to protect other assets. Next slide. So for the coastal bluff areas, I'm going to be pretty brief because I think you guys are more interested likely in the waterfront area. But the adaptation plan took a look at whether we could use beach nourishment or sand retention structures such as groins to retain the beaches along the bluffs. And the adaptation plan's preliminary finding is that those actions would not be effective along the bluffs. And the reason for that is the high rate of sand transport that exists along the bluffs. Pretty much as soon as you would place sand in that area, it would get drowned out and be swept away. So it really wouldn't be an effective tool. So what that means is that we are going to see a high rate of loss of beach area along the bluffs, and that will put a lot of pressure on our waterfront beaches for use as coastal recreation areas. So along the bluffs, there are options for use of rock revetments and slope protection. It is recommended that at least in the near term, while the beaches are accessible in those areas, that we limit the use of those revetments and slope protection to only protecting like major critical facilities or major public roads. In addition, it's recommended that we relocate some non-essential assets in Shoreline Park and other areas of the bluff. And in the mid and long term, the city will need to consider whether to use revetments and slope protection to protect Shoreline Drive in place or to reroute Shoreline Drive. Next slide. So moving to the low-lying and waterfront areas, I'm going to start with the kind of general waterfront areas and then move specifically to the harbor. So in the low-lying areas, the report recommends a number of near-term actions. One is increasing our amount of beach nourishment and use of seasonal beach berms along the waterfront and also potentially at Arroyo Burro Beach. And also considering the construction of dunes in addition. Other near-term actions that are recommended are the redesign and relocation of the existing tide gate on Laguna Creek, which prevents flooding up through the lower downtown area, and that we relocate and flood-proof several sewer mains and utilities that are currently located under the beach. Next slide. Additional near-term actions that are recommended are revising our floodplain regulations for new development and substantial redevelopment south of Highway 101 to require new development to be flood-proofed and elevated higher than existing elevations, base flood elevations. That we continue to require development south of Cabrillo Boulevard to be designed to factor in erosion and flooding from sea level rise. And that we initiate system-specific studies of mid and long-term options for the wastewater, stormwater, and water systems. Next slide. So in the mid and long term, around 1.5 or 2 feet of sea level rise, the city will need to consider whether to employ large-scale flood protection measures to prevent the flooding that's shown on the map on the right-hand side of this slide. And in order to prevent or mitigate the risks of flooding to that extent, does require the use of multiple flood protection measures together. So in order to prevent the flooding on that slide, we would essentially need a continuous seawall or levee spanning from Ledbetter Beach to the Clark Estate. That could either be we could either raise Cabrillo Boulevard or have a seawall that's south of Cabrillo Boulevard. We'd also, those seawalls or levees would have to connect into levees or flood walls along the lower portions of our major creeks. So Mission Creek, Laguna Creek, and Sycamore Creek. We'd have to deploy a number of groundwater dewatering wells and start pumping stormwater over seawalls and our flood walls. And in addition, there's always the option of relocation and flood proofing of facilities. So for these mid and long-term decisions, there's a number of unknowns. There's a number of feasibility questions, a number of studies that need to be done in the near term and midterm in order to make these decisions. Next slide. So for the harbor, it's recommended in the near term that we raise the breakwater, the groin and sand spit. We essentially put another cap on or raise the groin and sand spit and the groin, and the sidewalk that goes along the harbor commercial area. So essentially raising the bathtub of the harbor, if you will. And it's recommended that we pursue funding and feasibility studies through the Army Corps of Engineers for those projects. It's also recommended that as we renovate the marinas and the city pier, that we renovate them with higher piles, and that we consider use of a seawall for the southern portion of the commercial area. There is already an existing seawall in that area, but it's not continuous, and its location does not protect like the Harbor Yacht Club and the boatyard and a number of other facilities. In addition, it's recommended that we further flood-proof buildings in the harbor. Next slide. So for decisions in the mid and long term, the city will need to consider planning for the long term for the harbor. And options for the long term for the harbor include raising the overall grades of the harbor commercial area, relocating or removing some of the harbor facilities. And in addition, the city will need to consider at what point we need to start closing Stearns Wharf during coastal storm events due to threats of damage, and also when we need to either raise, redesign, or remove Stearns Wharf. Next slide. So the adaptation plan also has a number of citywide recommendations. I'm not going to go into all of these now. I think the key ones for the harbor are that the city really start increasing its use of hazard disclosures and risk indemnifications for all its permits and leases, like basically getting the word out, hey, this is happening, especially to landowners. That we amend city policies and procedures and adjust staffing to implement the adaptation plan. And that we incorporate sea level rise into our planning programs, our hazard mitigation and response program, and our capital improvement program. And that we really increase public engagement, especially with those that are directly affected. So those would be slip holders in the harbor and also landowners. It's also recommended that we retain the sea level rise subcommittee and the interdepartmental team and use them for planning moving forward, and that we pursue funding opportunities and follow emerging information on sea level rise. Next slide. So we have a webpage, www.santabarbaraca.gov/SLR. On there you can find all of our draft documents, but in addition, you can go to that page and there are interactive hazard maps. And you can actually type in any address and see the different hazards as they change over time. In addition, on our webpage, we have information on a number of our parallel efforts. We are in the process of updating our climate action plan. We have just approved a new strategic energy plan for the city. And we are in the process of updating our wildland fire plan to consider effects from climate change. So I'm looking for comments on the plan to be emailed to me by September 30th. And people can contact me at slrplan@santabarbaraca.gov. So with that, I'll end my presentation and I'm available for questions. And don't hold back. You can ask all the questions you want. Don't listen to Mr. Wiltshire.
Anyone?
Yeah. I've got a question.
Just go ahead.
Oh, okay. fantastic report, Melissa. I mean, I've read most of it, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's really tremendous. But I do have a couple of comments, questions rather. One thing I noticed that on slide 20, on the what's prioritized, it doesn't sound as though the harbor and the waterfront area is in the high priority. Yeah.
Commissioner Kramer, are you talking about the guiding principles?
Yeah, right, exactly. Prioritize human life, critical facilities and so forth. It doesn't sound as though Slips and Stearns Wharf and so forth would fit into that, or do they?
Commissioner Kramer, I'm just taking a look right now at the guiding principles. I don't recall that there's a principle that specifically calls out the harbor or any given city asset, because the idea of the guiding principles was to prioritize actions and but I think that and not focus in on any one given asset. So for instance, a huge priority of the city is the El Estero Water Resource Center and the sewer system. So a lot of those type of things could be called out, but I think that really falls under basic city functions and city services. And the harbor provides a number of those in addition to emergency services. And but I think it's a good comment, and it's a good comment also that the Harbor Commission could make, like, hey, this should be a big priority. As I noted, it definitely is emphasized in the adaptation plan how important the harbor breakwater is, and moving forward, and not just for protecting the harbor uses. So I think that is highlighted, but that is a good comment.
Okay, and I have another sort of comment I've made a series of notes, most of which aren't relevant at this point, but in terms of the cost and the benefit, you said basically it's $4 billion to do nothing and $4 billion to do many of these adaptations. Of course, the waterfront area would be just a small part of this, but the waterfront is an enterprise fund. And I'm not sure how its primary income, its slips and its parking and its rents could possibly fund these requirements. Is that being considered?
Commissioner Kramer, I would say all potential sources of funding are being considered, but I think it is widely recognized that we are not going to, as a city, be able to do this alone. We are going to need state and federal help. And we are going to have to look in the future at bigger city revenue streams. So bond projects, tax projects, things like that. I think slip fees and other fees are mentioned, but what we're really right now trying to focus on are grant opportunities involving the Army Corps of Engineers, really trying to use our regional, state, and federal resources to seek funds there. Mr. Wiltshire, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
No, I just thought I'd hop in. I don't want you to have to answer how we're going to come up with $4 billion with on your own up there. So
yeah, and also to note that as you know, Commissioner Kramer, the cost benefit analysis in the adaptation plan was a citywide plan. There were many assumptions made. And so the actual cost and what the city actually chooses to go forward with is not known at this time. So I think that's one of the most important steps of the 5-year implementation plan will be to specifically cost out all these at least near-term actions, so that, and identify potential funding sources so that we can factor those costs and funding sources into our priority mix.
Got it.
And I will hop in from the waterfront specific angle. As Melissa mentioned, this really is a start. So this kind of gets us thinking about building this into our existing capital program. We haven't yet, none of this is budgeted, But what it does is provides a great path forward for our existing capital program so that maybe we can make some of this incremental change over time. And if there's projects that we already are completing, such as Stearns Wharf piles, if we're doing any marina replacements, pile replacements, we can kind of take this all into an account. So there's some economies of scale of using the capital dollars that we do have to kind of maybe incrementally go in the right direction.
And just to add on to that, Commissioner Kramer, if you look at our near-term action list, a number of the projects are projects that have been on the books for a while.
Right.
Like the Laguna Taigate project, we update, we look at renovating the breakwater every about 20 or 30 years. So, they're not projects, we renovate our marinas in phases.
Right.
A lot of them are projects that have been on the books for a while. It's just that they're have a higher priority now. And in addition, we need to consider how to design in the future for sea level rise.
Yeah, no, I got that. I also had a sort of a question in reading the report and about the nourishment of the beaches. At this point, from what I've observed over the last years, then when the dredging is done and the sand is pumped down to East Beach and so forth, by the next cycle, most of that is gone. It's basically an equilibrium between what's pumped down and what's needed. And I think it's going to be a major question where the additional sand is going to come from. And one thing that I wondered about, I'm also on the Vision Water Committee. And they've said consistently, and everybody always says consistently, that it's impossible financially, basically, to lower Lake Cachuma. And maybe there could be a working together on that as a way of getting some of the sand that's going to be necessary for the beaches. And it's just an observation. But it's a really interesting report, and I really thank you for all your work you've done, you and all the staff. So that's my end of my comments for the moment.
Yeah, Commissioner Kramer, those are important issues that you've raised, and the effectiveness of beach nourishment moving forward and where we would get the sand. So can we dredge more areas of the harbor or West Beach is a big question mark. And it's actually one of the near-term actions is looking at the potential for that. And there are funding sources for those type of studies right now. In addition, it's something that Beacon's also considering. All the member agencies are, everybody's looking for sand. So that is something that I am sure that Mr. Wiltshire and I will be talking to Beacon about tomorrow at their meeting.
Well, there's too much sand in Gibraltar and too much sand in Cachuma. So, maybe it could be funneled somehow to the coast. Thank you.
Question, you keep talking about the Army Corps of Engineer and federal funding. Are there, as you do a snapshot of what's available today for sea level rise adaptation plans, has the Corps of Engineers actually done sort of a financial visioning document, given the fact that the city of Santa Barbara is not going to be the only municipality, a coastal municipality that will be seeking Corps of Engineers funding. And I was involved in a project, a beach replenishment project, where it required the county and the municipality to basically agree to maintain the berm to a 100-year storm level, and then we qualified for a huge slug of federal money if we did that. So I'm just curious, has the Corps come up with funding scenarios and programs that might work? If that's where all the eggs are in the basket right now.
So Commissioner Nelson, things are evolving fast on the funding side of things. At the federal level, there's a lot more funding right now for existing hazards, and it's definitely can be a consideration in funding if those existing hazards would be exacerbated by sea level rise. So the harbor and the waterfront area would certainly qualify into that category. So there are a number of resources such as Army Corps water resource projects and feasibility studies that we could pursue. I think the sooner that we pursue those things, because everybody's going to be after them and already is, the better. There's also money through FEMA hazard mitigation. Again, that tends to focus on existing hazards, but they are more and more considering the impacts of climate change. Under this current administration, it has not been emphasized to change those programs to acknowledge climate change or sea level rise, but that could change with a new administration. And then at the state level, there's a number of funding opportunities. I will tell you that a lot of them focus on natural solutions, which actually, and managed retreat. So that we might qualify for things like the beach burn projects, increased dredging, moving Laguna Tide Gate. That's actually would be considered a retreat project. But that is one of many comments that I would say that the city and the other regional agencies have to the state is, hey, like we need funding for more than just nature-based projects at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? John?
Thank you very much, Melissa, for your comprehensive report. There's a couple of questions that I have. Number one, the data modeling is quite impressive. What tool did you use to derive those graphics?
Well, Commissioner Sedman, I am glad that I didn't have to derive any of those graphics, but our consultants primarily used, there's a model developed by USGS called Cosmos 3.0, and it was just released in 2018. Luckily, we were lucky to hit that. And it's very comprehensive. It basically shows how coastal flooding and erosion would change over time with sea level rise. And it's the basis for our maps. In addition, USGS has just released, like a week or two ago, a groundwater model of impacts of how sea level rise would impact groundwater levels throughout the state. And so they are continually, USGS is really on top of things, same with NOAA, and coming up with many of these models. They're also participating in development of a lot of these shoreline monitoring programs.
Excellent. And was the biology taken into consideration? I know that you have background in integrated biology, but I didn't see that you mentioned any of the effects on local biology and some of those systems that could affect the fisheries.
Yes, Commissioner Sedman, that's a really good comment. This report did not look specifically at potential impacts to fisheries. I know that the state and the Ocean Protection Council are conducting those studies, but this adaptation plan did not address that. So that would be a good comment. In addition, this plan, because it had to look at so many issues, it did take a broad brush look at ecological impacts of sea level rise and potential impacts of some of the measures of sea level rise. Like if you look at any given adaptation option, it does discuss the potential for impacts to biological resources. But because the plan covered so many issue areas, it is only a small portion of the plan. But I think those are really good comments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for weighing in on that. Much appreciated. Once again, thank you, Melissa.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions? Okay, hearing none. Melissa, you have an impressive grasp of the material here. We appreciate very much you giving up part of your evening to present that to us.
Yeah, and thank you for your comments. And I just want to thank Commissioner Kramer and Sloan for continuing to be part of the Sea Level Rise subcommittee. That actually has been a really good guiding committee for our plan.
And I'd like to say for Jim Sloan, he's in Colorado, and I guess he's not able to get online. He had hoped to be online he had questions and comments, but he seems not to be here.
Yeah, he was here earlier. I think he maybe lost his connection.
He was in some remote area,
Yeah.
so he wanted to be here to hear you.
Okay, very good. Very, very interesting and scary at the same time. So let's move along to item 8 under new business. Ms. Rodriguez, would you recite that for us?
Yes, of course. Item number 8, Waterfront Department's fiscal year 2020 preliminary budget review. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a staff report providing a brief summary of the Waterfront Department's revenue and expenditures as of June 30th, 2020, and provide comments as appropriate.
Mr. Bossi.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I will be presenting this year's preliminary budget review. I don't think any of this will come as a surprise to any of you, but please stop me if you have any questions. Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, big picture, the Waterfront Department's revenue and expenditures at the conclusion of the third quarter, so the end of March, indicated a very strong fiscal year. However, as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic really took hold in mid-March, and the Waterfront Department saw revenues fall short of our budgeted estimates by over $800,000. And the chart you'll see on the screen is our general revenue summary with our individual components, and I'll go over, I would say highlights, but these are going to be lowlights. So next slide, please. Okay, so again, overall revenues were down over $800,000. Our commercial leases, that includes both the harbor and Stearns Wharf, were down 8%, which equated to almost $145,000. Similarly, our food service leases were also down 8%, resulting in a decline of $253,000. Interestingly, our visitor fees were right on budget, which shows that apparently people were continuing to come to Santa Barbara. It's a very popular place to come and visit with their boats. So we're glad to see that. Our slip permit transfer fees came in a little over $225,000 over budget for the year. We saw a total of 79 transfers that equaled $1,225,350. Next slide, please. Our parking services really took the brunt of the COVID pandemic, at least from March, April, May, and June, resulting in a decline of about 20% or nearly $630,000. Our other fees and charges were up 50%. That's a nice percentage, but a small amount there. And that primarily came from increases in wharfage and dockage revenues. And if you recall, back last year, July, August, September, October of 2019, the Casitas Pier down in Carpinteria was closed. So those oil derrick boats rerouted to Santa Barbara, which provided a boost in our wharfage and dockage revenues. Another additional revenue from that category was the electricity cost recovery program to the tune of about $89,000. It's interesting that it's classified as a revenue because that $89,000 is just turned around and goes right back out the door. It's a dollar for dollar. We take it in, we turn around, and we pay SCE for that. Our rents and concessions were up slightly at 9%. Those are some of our smaller, well, I shouldn't say small, but a number of our odds and ends leases, whether it be the Yacht Club or UCSB and things like that. And those were just standard increases in their lease rate. that go from year to year. And then miscellaneous fees, that includes everything from cruise ships to room rentals to film permits and other such things. We're down over $220,000. Obviously, a big part of that was the cancellation of 10 of our cruise ships that were scheduled to visit Santa Barbara in the spring of this year. Next slide, please. So the other side of the coin, we talked about revenues, our expenditures. Our expenditures came in significantly below what was budgeted, to the tune of a little over $1.8 million we reduced our expenditures by. And I'm going to get into these a little bit. Next slide, please. So big picture, again, down $1.8 million. Our salaries and benefits were down $721,000. And part of that, a good part of that, were savings were the result of numerous positions being vacant for a period of time, including the Waterfront Director position, the Waterfront Director's Executive Assistant. We had a Harbor Operations Manager, obviously, that we talked about earlier tonight. We had an Administrative Specialist retire, and we continue to have a vacancy in our Harbor Patrol officers. In addition to that, over 40 hourly employees in parking and facilities, as well as Harbor Patrol, had to be terminated at the end of March due to the pandemic. They have since, nearly all of them, gone back to work here at the harbor, so that's good. But there was a time there where they were not working, so that was also a savings, and that was across the board throughout the city. Our materials, supplies, and expenses were also down over $750,000. This came from savings in every individual division of the waterfront. We had numerous meetings as the pandemic ravaged the economy, and we cut back on all sorts of spending wherever we could, whether it be training, just anywhere we could cut, we continued to do, we did that. Our special projects were down $212,000. This is primarily due to the cancellation of the MTD Waterfront Shuttle, which the Waterfront Department partially funds. We share some of that cost with downtown parking, and that shuttle was suspended, and that's currently continues to save us about $28,000 a month. Our equipment costs were also down a little bit. Really, that's just a result of fewer people working. We have stay-at-home orders, so we didn't get as many of the smaller projects that we wanted to complete as we normally would. And then the other category was down just under $40,000, and a good part of that expenditure was actually the funding. We had to partially fund a new Harbor Patrol vehicle that had become rusted out and was dangerous to drive. Next slide, please. So comparing revenue, at least from 2020 back to 2019, our fiscal year 2020 budget target was a little over $15.7 million. We came in at just under $14.9 million, or $812,000 below that. I should also note, and this is mentioned in your report, that this does not include an additional $418,000, I believe it was at last count, that came from rent deferrals. So our city accounting works on an accrual basis, and so whether we receive that rent from our tenants or not, it is booked as revenue. So that's additionally coming, that extra $418,000. So really, when you look at it, we came in about a little over $1.2 million below our revenue expectations. And that extra $418,000 was just from the last half of March. Well, not even that, it was April, May, and June as part of the rent deferral program, as I mentioned earlier, that continues through the end of this month. So overall, compared to fiscal year 19, we came in just under 2.4% below what we made in 2019. Next slide, please. All right, I don't have another slide, but basically what I wanted to say that, nearly every revenue category was negatively impacted and continues to be as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to ravage the national economy, and we are no exception. There have been a few bright spots in there. Some of our tenants have actually done better this year in certain months than others. But obviously, overall, most of them have not. So it's a situation we continue to monitor. We continue to work with our city attorney, with our economic development manager. We're constantly monitoring state and local laws to see if there's any way we can continue to help our tenants. As we mentioned in my business services report, outdoor dining, things of that nature. We're really working with people to make that happen. And obviously, we're very hopeful that we can reach one of those thresholds that Mr. Wiltshire mentioned in his director's report, where we can start to open up certain businesses. We can get a percentage of people back to indoor dining, especially with the winter months coming. They've been able to bear it. It's had pretty nice weather, but we all know that can change in an instant here. So we'll continue to monitor the situation. And I should mention that a lot of the savings we made expenditure-wise in 2020, we rolled into this current fiscal year. So those will continue for this fiscal year, not knowing how long this is gonna be around. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. That concludes my report.
The deferred rents, as you mentioned, are in principle recoverable by the end of September next year, unless it changes again. But are there, of the 61 leases, are there lessees that we know we've lost that are not going to be able to continue in business at this point?
Chair Sly, we are obviously hopeful that everybody makes this through. To date, we have not lost a single tenant, and we hope that continues. I couldn't tell you the exact financial situation of every tenant. We're hopeful that they all make it through, but reality and statistics kind of state otherwise. But we're going to do everything we can to help folks, everything within our power to help folks continue to be here in the water.
Okay, great. Well, that's encouraging. Thank you. Other questions?
I have a quick question, Lang. Mr. Bossy, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Is that a San Diego State Aztec poster you have behind you?
Yes, it is.
All right, good. Go Aztecs. So we canceled out the arrival or the mooring of 10 cruise ships, but we had Jerry Jones Bravo Eugenia, a 357-foot yacht, which is approaching cruise ship size. So was there any financial benefit, or what does a vessel like that get charged for dropping the hook in our harbor?
That is a good question, Mr. Stedman. I don't believe there's any charge because he is outside the harbor. He's mooring. It was a cruise ship in and of its own right, but they used some of the services in and around the city, but that's all I could really tell you. Mr. Wiltshire might have more specifics on any type of revenue gain on our end.
Right.
No, same story from the way I understand it. Sometimes boats of that size, they'll opt for a visitor slip as well and bring their tender in and pay for a visitor slip, but I don't believe he did this time.
Amazing. It was an amazing vessel to see out there, actually. But, well, who knows? Maybe we can just invite super yachts, Brian, and charge them a fee.
We can look into that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bossy. Any questions? Don't want to cut anybody off.
Yeah, this is Merritt. I noticed that we had some substantial cost savings, and I was wondering how much of that was actually just deferred, and at some point we'll have to go ahead and pay it back and doing those projects, buying those materials that we deferred buying. Just as kind of a off the cuff percentage.
Sure. That's a great question. So we did go through our capital program and reduce expenditures in that as well. For a lot of, we tried to separate it into essential items, things like the Sternsworth annual maintenance program, replacing piles and things like that. That's not something we wanted to punt off into the future. That was a safety issue, so we continue to do that. But some of our other projects, we significantly reduced the cost on. The idea being that we could spread it out a little, maybe do the planning component in the current fiscal year, and save the actual capital component until down the line. So by doing that, about 5 projects, we saved over $1 million in capital expenditures that way. So it was helpful on the capital side. Again, it's slowing up the projects, but we are making progress as far as planning and things like that.
I have a question. I'm not sure if this is the proper thing. We received 5 letters about the transfer fee. Is this the proper time to mention them or talk about them or what to do?
Let's see, that's the next item on the agenda, actually.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, since it's in the budget, I didn't know whether it was.
Yes, right. Okay. Okay, again, thank you, Mr. Bossi. So, Ms. Rodriguez, would you read agenda item number 9, please?
Yes, of course. Agenda item number 9, waterfront slip assignment policy action. Recommendation that Harbor Commission discuss and take action on the creation of a slip assignment policy ad hoc committee to further review the current slip assignment policy and associated slip permit transfer fees.
Okay, and we may have some commenters on this, but I want to stress before that this agenda item is to establish the committee and not to discuss or debate or review the slip transfer fee program itself. It's just about establishing the committee. So do we have people who would like to speak on this?
At this time, we don't have anyone with their hand raised, but I will keep monitoring to make sure. Oh, sorry, we do have one person. Lori Rafferty, would you like her to speak now, or do you want to continue speaking on anything before we take public comment?
Mike, you had your hand up. Would you like to add something first?
Oh, no, I guess I was hoping that I could apply or be considered for membership on that committee when a number of the commission members have 1, 2, 3 committee assignments. I have one for a committee that didn't meet at all last year. So it would be great if I could receive some consideration.
Okay, understand. You're looking for work. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. And could we have that input, please, from the speaker?
Yes, Lori Rafferty, I'm going to unmute you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You may begin. It appears you're self-muted at the moment. Lori Rafferty. So it appears that she's, oh, here we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hey folks, real quick here. Just checking in to make sure that after you talk about this ad hoc committee, I would like to know your schedule. I would like to know who's going to serve on it. And I would like to know how the public can meet with you and have input. And that's pretty much all at this point, because it's a super important topic to many of us that we keep pursuing. So please explain the whole process, and that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The public should certainly know all of those things. So, Mr. Wilshire, I think you've been contacted by some commissioners who wanted to serve on that committee. What are your thoughts?
Oh, as far as establishing the committee, that's fully your decision as the commission. I can definitely speak to the mechanics of how it will go and what the plan is, if you'd like me to.
Okay, and I think this is committee is to have 3 commissioners on it. Is that correct?
Yep, three or less. It just can't be a quorum, so it can't be more than 3.
Okay, Commissioner Nelson has indicated a wish to join that. Any others who would like to be on that committee? Uh-oh.
I do know that Mr. Sloan, Jim Sloan reached out and let me know that he would be happy to. In his absence, he did volunteer if there was not anyone else who urgently wanted to be on it.
Okay.
Hey, Lang, I'll volunteer to work with Mike and Jim.
Okay, excellent. So, do you think we need to take a vote on establishing this and who the members are, or can we just form it?
Either way you feel comfortable. If there's nobody else kind of vying for the spot, then you've reached 3, so doesn't necessarily need to be voted on, but you can once you have 3. It would be nice to take a roll call vote in agreement.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So would somebody craft a motion for the formation of this committee and the appointment of these 3 commissioners to it, please?
I'd be happy to advance the motion of those 3 named commissioners to head up our ad hoc committee for slip transfer fee.
Okay.
I second the motion.
And Ms. Rodriguez, would you do a roll call vote for that, please?
Of course. Commissioner Nelson?
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan? Commissioner Spicer?
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman?
Aye.
Commissioner Kramer?
Yes.
Commissioner McCray?
Aye.
And Chair Sly.
Aye.
All right,
Okay.
that's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Wilshire, when do you have any thoughts about when we would first convene this committee and how often it would be productive to hold these meetings? There are obviously a lot of interested members of the public in this.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. Well, after this, now that the subcommittee's been formed, I'll kind of act as point. So I'll send out an email to the subcommittee and try and find a time that's not only reasonable for the subcommittee, but also reasonable for members of the public, in hopes that people can access it. The way that the public will access it is the same as we're accessing this meeting today. In COVID times, everything is still virtual. So if that changes and we're in this subcommittee still in action, we will meet in person, but until newer times, we'll be doing it as we're doing now. So I don't have a date yet, but I'll reach out to the committee members and get something set up in the very near future. Yeah, Mr. Nelson.
Okay,
Thank
two
you.
questions.
Yeah.
One is the timeliness of this. Obviously, there's a lot of folks that are anxious for results of our work. And is this going to be structured like a standing committee, or is this going to be structured a little differently with a specific time and a task that might allow us to meet without the bells and whistles of a Brown Act requirements?
Yeah, that's a great question. My preference would be that these are public meetings. This is kind of being driven by a lot of public input. So that's kind of the reason we're doing it. I'd hate to give the impression that we're doing this behind closed doors or on our own. So I really see this as something that is viable to put staff time into to hold public meetings and allow everyone to have a say if they want.
Yeah.
Okay, now my second question is that the Planning Commission dealt with this issue of average, unit density, and it was very controversial. And one of the ways they dealt with it was not to have the public stand in, a line of 20 people to offer their comments, but they actually participated in a workshop that dealt with aspects of the problem. And so I know from talking to some of the planners in the community development program that there's software that allows you to have breakout groups digitally. So you don't just have everybody line up and offer their opinions and move on, you actually have the public actively engaged in, the deliberation of the commission. So if it was possible to consider that, you might give Jessica Metzger a call. She works with Melissa, and because I know she's done the research on it. She's my neighbor.
Okay, well, that can be on the agenda for the first meeting of the committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that's great insight. I mean, we've done workshops in the past, and it's really great when everybody can meet and be in a room, but it is pretty interesting too that there's tools out there to kind of workshop in these COVID times. So I'll look into that, but I agree with Chair Sly that we'll get a meeting on the books as soon as possible and kind of discuss the topic, and from there we can branch out and figure out where we need to go.
Okay, very good. We've got to start.
Yeah. Thanks
any
for looking into
other
the
comments?
technology, Mike. Thanks for looking into the technology.
Yeah, I like that kind of stuff.
Good.
Do we have any commission and staff communications?
Yes, I'm sorry. I know the hour is late, but I had a conversation with Mike in the interim about a number of the presentations that have occurred at the last couple of meetings have involved a slideshow that reference the public trust doctrine and the title of the Tidelands Act and what is permissible and what is not permissible and where these monies have to be spent. And as we talk about these, programs and projects that are going to be cut and capital budget and all that, I think it's sort of important to know what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So I was wondering if at a future meeting, not necessarily the next meeting or the meeting after that, if we could reach out to the State Lands Commission and have the individual, I think her name is Sherry Pemberton, who's involved in the granted land programs, who could share with us what the restrictions are on the use of the funds. For example, must they be spent on state tidelands in the harbor, or could they be spent city for that matter, if it was going to achieve a purpose set forth in the public lands doctrine? I'm aware that other jurisdictions and ports, I think, have used their tideland funds outside the immediate area for things that are related to recreation, environmental preservation, commerce, navigation, and fisheries. So it would be nice to have some input from those folks as to what is possible and not. There's no urgency to doing that. I just think it would really be interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be a good refresher for us all, and subject to let's keep that on the whiteboard for a meeting this year, subject to availability of someone to make a presentation, and maybe also if we could get it into a meeting that's not extra long.
That would be fantastic. That'd be fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilshire, would you make a note of that, and let's keep that in mind.
Yep, noted. And in the meantime, I can send out documentation on the Tidelands grant and all of whoever wants to read up on it. It's riveting.
I would be interested.
Yeah, I've gorged through it, and it is it's very, very interesting. So I'd be happy to send out what we have.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay. Last on the agenda is member committee assignment reports. I'm not aware that any committees have met since our last meeting in July, but
I think I'm done.
Laura's still on. Yeah, I'll take this moment just as a reminder. I mentioned it, but the commercial fishing subcommittee will be meeting next week on Wednesday, September 23rd at 4 o'clock. The agenda for that is going to be posted tomorrow, and so that's something of note.
Okay, very good. Any other comments or any business before we entertain an adjournment?
Yeah, great job, Lang. in your first meeting. My kudos to you. Bravo Zulu.
Thank you. Well, I studied under you, so that's where any success was due to that. So hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I motion to
Second.
adjourn the meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. The meeting is adjourned. Thanks to the commissioners, to the staff, to the people who gave us input tonight, and to Melissa Hetrick for her presentation, for giving up a good part of your evening tonight. See you next month.